Hey everyone, today this video right here is going to open a lot of eyes. I saw this article here and this is what got me digging into some information about more into the quarantine situation and other laws that they have that they can implement due to these type of viruses. Alright, this article says, doctors call for more coronavirus testing in the US. But the healthcare system is hampered by a lack of testing kits. They continue to put that out too, that they just aren't able to test this. Which just shows me that they're trying to have, deniability. They can say, oh, it spread, but it spread because we couldn't trace it or we couldn't test for it. The novel coronavirus COVID-19 does not appear to be spreading in the United States. The Center for Disease Control and Prevention categorizes it as an emerging, rapidly evolving situation. But the group Doctors for Disaster Preparedness says it's very hard to tell the status of the virus in the U.S. because at this point there is no way to really know. You see, they're leaving it wide open. There's no way to know. It is impossible to be sure that the virus is not spreading without more extensive testing. She points out that testing for COVID-19 has been limited to persons under suspicion, or PUIs. That is a person with fever, signs of a lower respiratory infection, exposure to a person known to have COVID-19, or travel to China within 14 days of the symptom. In recent days, the CDC has changed the way it considers whether someone in the U.S. is a person under suspicion. See, they continue to change it. They continue to push the days back that you could have it, without even having symptoms. All this is to blur the line. This way, they are justified by the laws that I'm going to show you to be able to put you in a quarantine or to put you under surveillance. If a patient is severely ill, testing can be considered if exposure history is equivocal. Otherwise, testing is not likely. The problem is the limited availability of test kits, which are in great demand in Asia at the moment. Doctors for Disaster Preparedness says some test kits have been shown to be defective, so replacements have been ordered. Accuracy has also been an issue. They just continue to put that out there. With all laboratory tests, there are both false positives and false negatives. There have been social media posts from people complaining that hospitals will not test their coughing and fever symptoms for COVID-19, even if they have tested negative for the flu. Orant says it is vitally important to stop this epidemic with public health measures. That's the part I really need you to listen to. It's vitally important to stop this epidemic with public health measures, especially if it begins to increasingly show up in the U.S. If it were rapidly to spread, she worries about its effect on the U.S. healthcare system. We may not be able to support seriously sick people who need ventilators because the necessary drugs come from China. On one hand, Orant is encouraged that the U.S. government is racing to ramp up production of critical drug and medical supplies, but she says if the system doesn't prepare for the worst, it will be very difficult to deal with a major outbreak when and if it should take place. Okay, now I want you to see what she's talking about when she says public health measures. What she was referring to is this right here. Okay, this is the Control of Communicable Disease Federal Register. Okay, now listen to the summary. Through this notice of proposed rulemaking, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the CDC, in the Department of Health and Human Services is amending its domestic, interstate, and foreign quarantine regulations to best protect the public health of the United States. These amendments are being proposed to aid public health responses to outbreaks of communicable diseases, such as the largest recorded outbreak of Ebola virus disease in history, the recent outbreak of MERS in South Korea, and repeated outbreaks and responses to measles in the United States, as well as the ongoing threat of other new or re-emerging communicable diseases. The provisions contained herein provide additional clarity to various safeguards to prevent the importation and spread of communicable diseases affecting human health into the United States and interstate. So what that states is this is not just them talking about how to prevent it from getting it from another country like what's going on right now. This also applies to something that happens just in the United States and the laws they have now to stop you if you are a threat to go state to state, which pretty much is everyone. And as you see, they use Ebola, they use MERS, and they use the measles. All of those things that we followed, that we knew that they were in control of, and especially look at the measles outbreak when we knew that was just so blown out of proportion. But there's the reason. They use each one of these to be able to then pass these laws and be able to do it without everyone freaking out, because they have programmed you enough to fear these so-called outbreaks. So what are those safeguards that they're talking about? Well, let's get into it. Now, I read this entire thing this morning, and obviously I'm not going to go through it all, but I will leave a link in the description so you guys can actually go through and read this entire thing if you want to, or just go through it and find the parts that I found that are very alarming. Talking about the quarantines now, is the federal government allowed to do this? Yes, although some epidemiologists, lawyers, and health organizations have expressed concerns that the CDC's broad authority could pose a threat to civil liberties. Yes, it definitely does. The Department of Health and Human Services, which the CDC falls under, has the authority to isolate or quarantine people in order to prevent communicable diseases from being transmitted or spread either from a foreign country into the U.S. or from state to state. The government can only isolate or quarantine people who the CDC reasonably believes may be infected. All right, I want to stop there. See, that's why. Look at reasonably believes. Well, what have they been telling you? The symptoms are hard to see. You may not have symptoms for days. So that leaves them able to do what? Oh, put you in a quarantine because they have any suspicion. Well, what? You just have to take their word on it. Do you trust them? Exactly. So they're going to use this against you. Okay? They have the authority to do this now. This all was done and finalized in 2017. Just for these situations. The government can only isolate or quarantine people who the CDC reasonably believes may be infected with or exposed to a quarantinable disease, which includes smallpox, viral, hemorrhagic fevers, and severe acute respiratory symptoms. Before issuing a quarantine or isolation order, the CDC conducts a public health risk assessment that considers a person's symptoms and whether they have been exposed to the disease. The CDC has 3 days from the time they take you into custody to serve them with an order for quarantine, isolation, or conditional release. The CDC says it strives to use the least restrictive and time-consuming measures to protect public health. Remember, this is all for your own good. It's always to help you and for your own good. But keeping someone at a military base in California is considerably more restrictive than home quarantine. The CDC is clearly concerned, as we are worldwide, about any spread of this condition anywhere in the United States. And to be sure, that's a legitimate concern, Hodge said. But is it any different than what we've seen with prior infectious diseases situations, including Ebola and other fronts where we did allow for home quarantine under those circumstances? Most likely not. But it's possible that the CDC has information about the people in quarantine that they haven't released publicly, which could potentially justify the agency's case for this kind of quarantine, he added. Oh, of course, the CDC's keeping information away from us. So we're just supposed to trust them. Once again, trust your government. How long can someone be quarantined? The government can quarantine someone only as long as necessary to protect the public. This is so broad and so open that they have full rights and authority to do whatever they want. In that time, the government would provide the public with healthcare options to protect against the disease, such as voluntary immunization. There you go. There's your vaccines. Or drug treatment to ensure that quarantined people who have been exposed to this disease don't infect others. So while you're in there, you have to do what they say. You have to take their drugs or their vaccine. Now they go on to say, there is no vaccine to prevent the infection. Okay, experts say the best way to prevent infection is to avoid exposure to the virus. What rights do people have in quarantines? People who are in quarantines are entitled to a written order from the CDC within 72 hours of being apprehended that explains why the agency thinks quarantine is necessary. If a person in quarantine believes the CDC has made a mistake, they can request that the agency reassess its written order within 72 hours. If the CDC maintains that the quarantine is necessary, the person can request an independent medical review to determine whether the CDC's recommendation is appropriate. They can also hire representation to be present at the medical review at their own expense. Those who can afford to hire their own representation can have a representative appointed at the government's expense. People in quarantine also have the right to take their concerns to court. Yeah, but that entire time you're still in their custody. You don't get to leave and fight your case like you would be able to normally. No, you stay there under their supervision and under their quarantine. This was one of the main reasons I wanted to make this video. Who foots the bill? If a person has health insurance, the CDC will bill their insurance provider for cost of care delivered during quarantine, according to Hodge. So depending on their insurance coverage, a person could be responsible for some or all of the cost. So that's right, not only are they quarantining you, now you're going to have to pay for it. It's just insane. I want to go back up here. I want you to see something. Remember, they list this right here, okay? The DHS, which the CDC falls under, has the authority to isolate or quarantine people in order to prevent communicable diseases. Okay, so I looked up what are the list for these. Yes, do you like that last one? The flu. What worries me is that they're going to use all of our videos and all of our research against us because we have done what? Continually said that the flu is worse than the coronavirus. So then, in turn, could they not flip that on us and say that this new strain this next year is a whole nother thing and it is so much worse than the coronavirus, and then they use the flu, which is already in the laws for them to do. It's already written there, so they can do this. They use all that information against us. So then they do all this again, but they do this with this new flu that they would say. But they by law are allowed to because of these laws passed in 2017. Okay, so then also they say that the quarantine as of right now that they're going through is voluntary. Well, we know it's not, because do you want to know what happens if you choose to leave? Public health officer issues quarantine order. Riverside County health officials have issued a quarantine order for one of the passengers from the Wuhan, China flight who attempted to leave March Air Reserve Base. Riverside County Public Health Officer Dr. Cameron Kaiser issued the order requiring the person to stay for the entire incubation period or until otherwise cleared. This action was taken as a result of the unknown risk to the public should someone leave MARB early without undergoing a full health evaluation. The individual will remain at MARB until their health status is confirmed. All other passengers from the flight also remain at MARB and continue to be evaluated. So you don't get to leave. It's not voluntary. If you leave, they're going to slap one of these on you. And do you want to see what else they can do? Let's see what the laws are for when you leave and what the punishments are. I know this video is getting kind of long, but there was so much information here. I really just wanted to get as much of it that I could to you guys. The other thing they said that they would do besides the quarantine was detention, which is the same thing as quarantine, and then conditional release. Okay? So they will release you as long as you agree to these conditions, okay, where they're going to surveil you. Okay, so that means that it can be done by visits by a public health official, telephone, or through electronic or internet-based monitoring as that term is defined. Okay, so they are going to be able to track you everywhere by whatever means they want. Okay, electronic or internet-based monitoring. Okay, so if you want to leave, you may be subject or will be subject. In general, such monitoring may include electronic or internet-based systems such as video chat and voice calls from computers, tablets, and mobile devices. This language is intended to be broad and would apply to any new or existing technologies that would allow for the public health supervision and monitoring of an individual under a conditional release order. Electronic or internet-based monitoring. I mean, listen to this. Integrated voice response systems, entry of information into a web-based forum, wearable tracking technologies, and other mechanisms and technologies as determined by the Director of Supervising Health Authority. So they are going to track you and watch every single thing you do. That's the only way they are going to allow you to leave on this conditional release. But guess what else? Here you go. Here's your agreement that you have to agree with. This is another part of it to be able to get that conditional release. Is proposing a definition for agreement, which refers to an agreement entered into between the CDC and an individual, expressing agreement between the parties that the individual will observe public health measures authorized under this part, as the CDC considers reasonably necessary to protect the public's health. And here they are, including quarantine, isolation, there's your conditional release, medical examination, hospitalization, and guess what? Vaccination. So if you want to leave, one of the agreements that you're going to have to sign is that you will take a vaccination. You guys, please pay attention to this. Look into this information. I'll leave the link so you guys can read it. I just want you all to realize what's going on. This is not something to fear, so don't take my, my passion and pride towards this as me telling you, oh, you should be freaking out or worrying. That's not it. But you should be aware of it. You should be prepared for it. Okay? Because this massive event that's happening with this coronavirus or COVID-19, it is a test for the final unleashing of whatever they are going to release. And I'm going to show you they're even pushing that in the headlines right now. right here in the USA today. We will survive coronavirus, but are we prepared for the next public health crisis? The threat posed by emerging infectious diseases and pathogens will not be resolved by simple measures. There are no silver bullets. Exactly. So they're willing to do whatever they have to do to get everybody to get in line, to follow their agenda. Keep looking into stuff, pay attention, look out for your friends, look out for your family. We are all in this together against this evil that is being unleashed. But, as I will repeat, there is no fear, especially if you have Jesus in your life. You seriously can put your feet up and relax, because nothing will affect anything that's going on right now. Nothing that happens in this world will ever affect eternity that you will spend in heaven. I thank each and every one of you for all the birthday comments, and I just thank you all in general. God bless each and every one of you. Talk to you soon.